Okay then Alex, this is your video feedback for component 1 of the animation simulation module. I see you've been doing a lot of rigging, which is good. Okay, so I've already had a look at all your material, but let's go through it again together. Okay, so if we have a look at this, first of all, I will say I'm really pleased that you talk your way through this as well. So you're explaining as you go along some of the issues you've had, some things that you couldn't quite fix, some things I might be wanting to critique, but you're kind of explaining why they've ended up as they are. So I'm really pleased that you've done that. That's a good thing. So I have heard everything you've got to say. So don't think I'm turning you down because I'm not interested. I'm turning it down so I can help, to talk over the top a little. But I appreciate your comments here about the set driven keys and things. But that said, it's not an awful job that you've done here. It does work, it functions, you get the idea. And I think it's a good case of saying, should you do this again, you probably would improve on it, and I'd expect that to be the case. However, what I am pleased about with the hand there is that you've got your controller system kind of attached to the hand. It sat there on top of the hand, and some people didn't manage to get that to work. But you did, and it worked. So again, yes, set-driven keys probably would have helped, but what you've done does work. It functions. Technically speaking, it functions. Here, you discussed the penetration of the character mesh. That's the skin of the character coming through the clothing. I think that would probably have been fixable in a way. I agree that maybe you're saying something about, well, he fixed it for one frame, but not the rest. I think that should have been fixable. I think you should have been able to weight paint the clothing to a point where it always stands that little bit proud of the underlying skin element. So I think that should have been fixable. But I'd be interested to see, more particularly why it wasn't working. Maybe the skin weighting was off, but that's something we'd have to have a look at. But I think it probably would have been fixable. Yep, display controls are all working and functioning. I'm pleased here also that you demonstrate the IK and the FK. Some people's submissions, they've not done that at all. They've just kind of shown that the character does move and think that's enough. But you demonstrated everything and you've done a good job of it. Now I do notice again that there was a little bit of skin tearing around the back when you did this, but then what we're looking for is fine there, but I think it does happen a little further. I think it's probably this intersection here. Again, a little bit of tidying up of the weight in there. But again, also what we've got to consider here is that perhaps what we're looking at there with this kind of pull and drag around is a movement that perhaps for this character might be anatomically impossible, or is pushing the boundaries of the joint limits and things. So I'm not so worried if there starts to be some intersection or tearing of the mesh, or into, some revealing of the underlying mesh and so on. At absolute extremes of the movement. It's the main kind of subtle movement, or the small, not subtle, but the smaller scale movement that you absolutely need to get right. If it can get the extremities of movement right as well, that's obviously is a bonus. Okay, so we'll move on with this. I am pleased with the demonstration that you gave here. It's a very thorough demonstration. That's always a very good test, is to move the hip, pelvis area. Again, good articulation. It looks like you've considered the joint limits as well on this. I mean, I know you've used the kind of the auto Maya rig setup, but that's fine. But it still takes some setting up, and particularly adding those wrist bones on the finger controls and things can take some doing. But you've done a good job of that. I'm just going to squeeze through here a touch because I did notice that you did the foot rolls, by the way. But I just wanted to have a look at your discussion here of the kind of wrist roll bone. Yes, a shame you couldn't get that in there, but that said, that was deemed to be like an extra. I don't believe that was must do type thing. So that roll bone, yes, I'd like to have seen it done, but it was an extra element. So I'm not so worried. But what you have done, it's very clear from this, does function. You've got pretty much all the skin weighting right as far as I can tell. Now, one thing that you might want to have done purely for the demo is to strip back the character just to their skin, so remove all the clothing, the hair, the hat, leave the eyes in, of course, just so we can see how the skin of the character behaves, because that would have been useful as well. because I mean I suspect it moves fine. I've no reason to believe otherwise. We will have a look at the Maya file, of course, to verify that. Yep. So that I'm really pleased with that. So let's move on to your next render. So it's good that you've done an ambient occlusion type render again, because I get to see the shaded areas. Now looking at this, for the most part it looks pretty good. I mean I think anatomically you're probably pushing the neck a little bit far there, but I mean there's possibly a little bit of a pit formed here, so I might want some tidying up around there. One thing I will do, I think, is in the playback, for the speed, I'm just going to slow it down just a little for this one. It just kind of speeds through just a touch. That'll just allow me to see a little bit better what's going on. Yes, there's a little, like a little pit sort of thing formed there. Again, it could be the material of the dress, or it could have been the whole character. All works, articulates quite nice. There's a little bit of a recess forms there, too much deformation, I think. Yeah, some creasing there, some unwanted, unnecessary creasing there, and I think that possibly partly comes from the animation that you've put on the character there. One thing to remember is when you are raising the arms up on a character, or on yourself, sit where you are now and do it. When you get to a point where you're in a T-pose, all the movement is about kind of the top of where the arm joins into the kind of the clavicle bone here. When you get beyond that T-pose and move upwards, it actually moves from the top element of the clavicle up here. So it wouldn't articulate about this point, it would articulate about from up here, which is probably why you've got your crushing in there. So it's probably more an animation thing than it is a skinning thing. Again, we'll have a look in Maya and we'll see, perhaps. That all seems to function quite nicely, and there's no unnecessary tearing or bulging of the legs. Things are pretty good. I mean, it seems like there's a little bit of crumpling going on there, but that's probably more to do with the render than it is the setup that you've got. Crazy camera, just keep your camera controlled. Yeah, there's a little issue there with the finger as it comes down. You can see here, fingers flattened all the way out, kind of curled over on the end. The others look okay actually, but that one's one to look at. Definitely so. But again, it's a decent attempt at the figurative stuff. So what I think we'll do now is I'll just jump into Maya. We'll have a look at that. Now I've actually currently got your facial set up open in there, so I'll just go in and open the correct one. Should work. Alex, there you are. Character rig. Okay. Okay, here we go. See, you've got your expressions set up there, which are great. You know that those work because you demoed them. Okay, now I don't know if, because of the setup of this, we'll be able to do anything with that rotation. I think because of the control system that's in there. Yeah, so you can see that. I mean, I know that's not the right way to articulate it, but I want to see that, so it's articulating about this point, that bone. There should be also be some potential to articulate from this bone. Now that looks to me, rather than rotate it in the right axis, it's doing it in the wrong. Although it is moving appropriately. Yeah, so I think if you were to have moved this bone appropriately from the clavicle bone there, I think you probably wouldn't have had that creasing going in at the top of the mesh. I think you probably have done a good job of it actually, but I think that might have been the issue. So I'm kind of okay with that, and that seems to be working reasonably well. Okay with that. I mean, your expressions here, I've had a look through those, and we know they function because I've seen them in action. But yeah, I mean, again, you spent a lot of time setting this up, and it shows because you've done a decent job of it. I think it's pretty good. Again, I would have liked to have seen you tidy up some of these areas that you suggested didn't quite work. I think if you've identified that they don't work, perhaps you might have made an effort to fix them. But again, it depends how far down the line you are. If you've got so far down the line before you start to look at set driven keys and then you don't want to go back and add set driven keys and things, maybe you've made an informed decision that, you know, with the time that's left, it's not worth pursuing. I guess that could be the case. Okay, so let's jump forward into your facial animation material. I'll just maximize that if it will let me. And I think we're currently playing back at the slower rate, so I'll just go back to normal speed. And I'll just take him back to the start so we get a full proper test. Okay, so that, in terms of articulation moves, again, you've got pushing up, closes the jaw, pulling down, opens the jaw. I do notice that with the jaw movement, you have got, you know, correct use of the kind of the upper lip pulling down and the lower lip pulling down, but it does tend to, to say it, look quite sad. It's almost like it's pulling a little bit too much of the upper lip and maybe not joining fully with the lower lip. So maybe perhaps that's a little bit too much. I mean, again, that's minor criticism, but it does leave our character looking a little bit glum. There, look, a bit down in the mouth, because I think this should probably meet a little bit closer towards the middle area, if not a bit higher up there. But it functions. Technically speaking, it functions. Okay, the smile's good. I mean, it's useful to have things which are kind of pushing towards a full expression rather than maybe just a single aspect of this. Because if this was a smile control, I might argue that you could do a little bit more than just pull up the corners of the mouth. You might kind of puff out the cheeks a little bit, where this, you know, kind of furrows a little area down here, so we see a little bit of the cheeks coming down a bit. It might actually just pull up the cheek bone area a little bit. You know, it might pull that back, pull it a little bit tight. If you think of your own smile, that tends to be what will happen. You feel the creasing. It could be creasing around the eyes. But that said, you could have that as maybe slightly misnamed, maybe not smile control, but maybe it's kind of, you know, mouth corner lift, and then next to that you would have, you know, cheekbone control, and then next to that you might have kind of eye control, which would form, all of it put together would form smile control. Or you could have a single control that does all the things at the same time. That's possible too. But they do function. Technically speaking, it all functions. Very sad little chap there. I think probably it's pulling in a little bit too tight. I'll just get that to work. There, I think it's probably just pulling in a little bit too tight. We can't quite see for these bones. You could have done with just hiding those. It's probably just pulling the lips in a little bit too much. I mean, I will go in and I'll have a test of this myself. But again, functionality works. Individual controls for left and right, or both together, that's good. Brow controls. I would be careful about having the brow controls pull the lids too much. It looks like they're pulling the eyelids perhaps a little bit too much there as we lift those up. The lids work individually, but when we get the brow, I don't mind it pulling it a bit, but perhaps that's a little bit excessive. I don't know, it just seems a little bit so. Okay, I mean, this is an interesting one. I'm not so certain about this lower, because it seems to lower the sides but then bring up the area in the middle towards the nose. Again, anatomically, I'm not sure how accurate that is. Yeah, the flare, it functions, but again, anatomically speaking, it seems like it's pulling the central part of the nose a little bit too much, which tends to be a little bit more rigid in its position. It doesn't kind of float too much. So I'd be careful of that. You've got good eye movements and excellent skin tugs there on the eyelids. Again, and those skin tugs were extras, so again, that's good. We push that beyond the basic expectation. There could probably been a little bit more skin tug, I think, of the upper lid there, but you have done it. That's pretty well weighted. There's probably a little bit too much fall off towards the shoulder area, but I mean, the twist there works quite nicely. Yep, as does that. Okay, no unnecessarily kind of unnecessary creasing or anything. Yeah, I mean, that's great. So let's move to the next one. Okay, a good series of tests that are in there. It shows a full sort of range of the tools that you've set. The one critique I would offer would be that when you're having a render of something like this, just sort out your lighting a little bit, sort out your rendering and lighting settings, because a lot of this, it looks quite shiny, it looks a bit specular. I would have just kept that very dull, or just do an ambient occlusion type pass on this. I mean, again, it's an aesthetic thing. It's just that in some of these shots, it's difficult to see where the creases are on the face. It's not quite this, but it looks almost kind of 2D toon sort of shader in some areas. So just be careful of that, particularly when you're showcasing your work. Do it to its best. Now, obviously, I've already seen what this does. I've seen the Maya file, and I've seen your demonstration of it. But just be careful of that kind of thing. Okay, with that said, it's good. I like it. Okay, so let's open back up your head rig. Have a quick look at that. And in that, we'll be able to just check, some of the settings that you've got for your sliders and bits and pieces, and then we'll also be able to have a look at some of your expressions and whatnot. So we'll just go into Window, Animation, Expression, have a look in there, and we'll also go into Window, Animation. Oh, try again. Trying to be too quick, aren't I? And Shape Editor. These are my main two things to have a look at, and that was already open actually. Okay, yeah, you've got some good stuff in there. I'm pleased again that you've got the skin tugs for the eyes, and you've named everything up appropriately. So should anybody need to come in and edit these, if you had an animator working on this, it'll be obvious which bit does which. I like that. This obviously functions. I've seen it work, and it makes sense. It would be interesting to have seen whether you had any corrective blend shapes in there, things that just tidied things up, particularly when you've got things like the jaw open and close, and when you've got it moving left and right. It looks like it works pretty well actually, but I think probably a corrective one there would have worked, where you can see where the crease is. We just tidied that up. So again, it's something we covered, kind of corrective blend shapes. I think a little bit more obvious use of those would have been good. Now let me try out these eyes, because I'm really interested to see how your skin tug works for the eyes. There's something going on there, but I'm not sure how effective it is. Let me just see what we can do. Okay, I'm just going to put it into wireframe, because I think that would be useful for me to see the wireframe. No, not so much really actually. Take it back out of wireframe. Yeah, there's some skin tug, but I'm not sure how successful it is. It does seem that the pupil is penetrating a little bit. I know I'm pushing it beyond its natural limits, but there should still be something there. But anyway, that said, you've attempted that, because I've seen it. Anyway, so the only other thing I would probably suggest would be, in your scene, is label these up, make it very obvious and explicit what they are. Now I know you have, because I seem to remember in here, you go back one, that you actually did have them labelled up. Just in your file, they don't seem to be there. It could well be that it's hidden, I suppose. Oh, wrong one. Yeah, there they are, words. I thought you had. I thought I'd seen it. So, yep, scratch that. Ignore what I said. Okay, so final thing will be your blog. This, I would say, is probably the biggest disappointment of the lot, because you've done a decent job of the practical application of this. And I know in here you do say, well, I've taken some shots and I filmed myself doing this, and I might have lost a few bits. And yeah, I forgot to screenshot some things. You should know by now that there's no excuse for forgetting to do these things. I would have liked to have seen this to be much more extensive. A lot more research and development for kind of joint limitations, examples of how other people have laid out their control systems, looking at the human anatomy, facial stuff, and so on. Other rigging of other people's work and things. So I think that's a shame, because I mean that's a little bit like throwing away marks. This is worth 10 marks out of the 50, which is 20% of the entire first section of this assignment. So be careful about throwing marks away. They're relatively easy marks to come by, because you screenshot what you've done, reflect on it, show what other people have done, and develop your own skills from that. But that said, the practical stuff is pretty good. It's not bad. I like the way you presented it as well. It's always good to present it appropriately. You make us fully appreciate what you've done, the hard work that you've put into it. So generally well done. Just this bit's a disappointment. That's all.